I've always been responsible in our family, even though I'm the younger sister. My name is Brittany. I'm 27 years old and I work as a marketing assistant for a small company in the city. They don't pay me much, but I get enough to cover my expenses and help my sister Diana. Diana is 31 years old. She is a widow. She has two sons, Tyler, who is 8 years old, and Mason, who is 6 years old. Her husband Greg died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving her to raise the children alone. I was terrified for her when it happened, so I immediately offered my help as much as possible. Our parents Bob and Linda live about 20 minutes away from both of us. They are already over 60, and they have always preferred Diana. I noticed it when we were kids, but I tried not to pay attention to it. Mom always said that Diana needed more attention because she was sensitive. Whatever that means, after Greg's death, Diana found it difficult to pay for her apartment, so I started paying half of her rent. I also pay for some of her utilities, including the internet bill. It's straining my budget, but I've decided that family helps family. That's what I was raised to believe. Anyway, Brittany could pay all the rent if she wanted to, Diana said loudly at a Sunday dinner last week. She doesn't have to support the children. I almost choked on the mashed potatoes. Diana, I'm already stretching my budget. I can't afford all your rent, I said indignantly, unable to hide my irritation. Mom shook her head. Brittany, your sister is struggling. You could cut down on those expensive coffee drinks that you like. She said it in such a tone, as if I was somehow to blame. What are the expensive coffee drinks? I asked in surprise, even though I actually started making coffee at home a long time ago to save money. Dad intervened. Your sister needs more help than you're giving her, Brittany. Family comes first. Such conversations took place almost weekly. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I felt like my efforts were being ignored or minimized over and over again. Diana, meanwhile, had no difficulty with her expenses. While I was counting the change, she spent the money on new clothes, trips to the beauty salon and other pleasures, as if nothing had happened. But whenever I pointed this out, my parents acted as if I was petty, and I couldn't help but feel guilty in their eyes. All this time, I was tormented by the thought that maybe I was really doing something wrong, missing something in my desire to help, but when I tried to discuss it, they just brushed it off. The worst part was how Diana treated her children. Tyler and Mason were sweet boys at heart, but they had no discipline. Diana was always engrossed in her phone, barely paying attention to what they were doing, and I often had to step in to prevent them from becoming real tomboys. The boys were running around the apartment, shouting loudly, and only when I needed her time, which was often just at the moment when she was leaving them, I became their babysitter. Of course, I did not refuse to help, but sometimes I was overcome with fatigue, as if at some point I myself found myself in the role of a caregiver, and not a younger sister. My apartment, which no one had notified me about, became a turning point last Thursday. I had a headache after a busy day at work. My boss criticized my quarterly report, and I still had to finish the edits to send it before the end of the day. I sat down at my laptop, already exhausted, and hoping to get some rest. I immersed myself in my work. But suddenly the doorbell rang. Urgent, bachelorette party, Diana said loudly as soon as I opened the door. I glared at my sister, barely able to contain my irritation. Diana smiled at me with her typical carefree smile, and before I could say a word, she opened the door a little wider, and both her sons rushed through it. Tyler and Mason rushed into my apartment, shouting and laughing. The boys have already had dinner. I'll pick them up around midnight. Thank you, little sister. Diana instantly slammed the door and disappeared, leaving me standing with bewilderment in my eyes. I sighed, realizing that all these urgent situations were just part of the inevitable routine. Tyler and Mason, despite their overactivity, were sweet boys, and in the end, I couldn't get mad at them. They were jumping on my couch, laughing, hitting pillows, and I automatically started picking up toys from the floor, making sure once again that I wasn't leaving them in a mess. But at that moment, my head was starting to hurt even more. "Guys, please stop," I said, barely able to contain my irritation, trying not to lose the last remnants of patience. "I have to work today, and I have a headache." Tyler, not paying any attention to me, enthusiastically replied, "We want to play games on your laptop." His voice was full of impatience and excitement. I felt the growing tension in my body gradually turn into anger. I was tired of the constant worries that these evenings with my nephews brought me, when I had to be not only an older sister, but also a mother and a caregiver. "No, I need it for work," I tried to explain, although deep down I knew that my words didn't matter to them. "You can watch TV in peace." Mason, like his older brother, did not hear me and jumped to the laptop with a flourish. At that moment, there was a loud scream as Mason grabbed my laptop, and Tyler, trying to get it back, began to take the device away. Their wild noise and indifference to my condition finally made me lose my temper. I saw enough red, and I couldn't stand it anymore, and I shouted, "Both of you sit in opposite corners right now if you can't behave yourself. I won't be paying for your internet next month. Everything is fine." The boys' eyes widened in horror from the fact that their disobedience suddenly had real consequences, and, as if by magic, they immediately realized that they could not continue in the same spirit. They obediently sat in the corners, from time to time casting indignant glances at me, as if I had done something unimaginable, forcing them to sit quietly. I tried to contain my anger, even though every look at them made me feel guilty and annoyed. After 15 minutes, when they started being much quieter, I finally let them watch the movie. They behaved well for the rest of the evening, and to my surprise, I managed to finish my work. When Diana finally came to pick them up at 1 o'clock in the morning, instead of midnight, as promised, I felt relieved, but the joy did not last long. Immediately after Diana took them away, the boys started complaining. "Aunt Brittany was mad at us," Tyler said, his face clearly displeased. "She made us sit in corners. She said she wouldn't pay for our internet," Mason added, with obvious anguish in his voice. Diana's face darkened, and discontent flashed in her eyes. "Did you do what you did to my children?" she said, trying to control herself, but I could hear her holding back her rage. "They were fighting over your laptop. I had to work. How dare you punish my children? You have no right." Out of the blue, she continued, "Do you think paying some bills gives you the right to bully my children? I can call the police for this." I was stunned. These words, this aggression that Diana poured out on me, completely overwhelmed me, and I couldn't understand how all this could happen. How could she accuse me of trying to put my apartment in order and somehow limit the uncontrolled behavior of her children? I didn't know how to respond, but my inner discomfort only grew. They got out of control. Diana just turned away and vented her feelings in a rage. "I don't want to hear it. Come on, boys, we're leaving." With that, she ran out, slamming the door so hard that a painting fell off the wall, and I stood there, stunned, unable to even move. The phone rang 20 minutes later, and I felt my inner world crumble again. It was Mom. "Brittany, how could you treat your nephews like that?" Mom's voice was full of disappointment and pain, as if she had just found out about some terrible betrayal. "After all, your sister went through a lot. I raised you better than that." I tried to explain what happened, tried to convey that I was just keeping order and working, but Mom listened to me as if I were speaking in a foreign language. When the conversation ended, I turned off the phone and went to bed, trying to accept the fact that maybe I'm no longer part of the family as it used to be. I wondered when I became a family villain just because I had my own boundaries. When I allowed myself to say no, when I put my needs above the unrestrained help that was expected of me. I didn't know that things would get much worse in 3 days. Diana called me with exciting news, and even though I was tired, I was genuinely happy for her at that moment. "I've met someone, Brittany," she said, almost choking with delight. "His name is Ryan. He's in yoga class. He's divorced, works in finance, and he's just incredibly hot." I was really happy for her because she deserved to be happy, especially after everything she had been through since Greg's death. Maybe having a new person in her life will take some of the pressure off of me. Over the next 2 months, Diana's relationship with Ryan became the center of her universe. She talked about him all the time, showed me pictures, recounted their conversations. At first, I was worried about her, because she deserved to be happy. But over time, when all the conversations were about Ryan, I realized what this new Diana relationship meant to me. I noticed how her world was narrowing, and I was becoming more and more an invisible part of it. "Can you take the boys tonight?" "Ryan is taking me to that new Italian restaurant," Diana asked me one day, that Tuesday afternoon, when her eyes were sparkling with excitement. It was the third time this week that she had asked me to look after the children. "I do not know, Diana. I have a big presentation tomorrow. I need to prepare." I tried to protest, but she did not let me finish. "Please, it will only take a few hours. They will be good, I promise," she said without letting up. They were never good, and I knew it, but as always, I couldn't say no. Saying no to Diana meant enduring the guilt from her and my parents. It became a habit. Diana drove the boys without telling me in advance, promising to return early, and then returned a few hours later than planned. The boys' behavior worsened with each visit. They were getting angrier and angrier, and I began to notice how all their resentment at being sent back to me, as if they were hostages of my role in their lives, was taking its toll on me and my apartment. One evening, when I was more tired than ever and getting ready to spend the night peacefully, they spilled grape juice on my white sofa, with such indifference, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Another time, when I was trying to concentrate on my work, they smashed a ceramic bowl that my grandmother had given me, and from this blow I felt something heavy constrict in my chest. Each new storm in their behavior, each destructive action, seemed to chip away another piece of my mental balance, leaving only a void in my soul. After 8 weeks of this routine, I was mentally and physically exhausted. My job, which had always come first, was now suffering. I couldn't keep up with anything, and the apartment was becoming more and more abandoned, with more chaos than I could bear. I didn't have time for myself, for my friends, or just to be alone and recuperate. This feeling depressed me because I knew that it couldn't go on like this. I couldn't stand being in this vicious circle that was being created every week anymore. Something had to change, and quickly. Sunday dinner at my parents' house seemed like a good opportunity to talk about the situation and finally put things in order. Diana was in a great mood, which was obvious from the very beginning. She had just returned from a weekend with Ryan, and it seemed that the whole world for her was now focused only around his beautiful personality. The boys were running around the backyard fooling around, and we were sitting at a table on the terrace. I was waiting for the right moment to start a conversation, and when it came, I decided that I could no longer remain silent. I told Diana, choosing my words carefully so as not to escalate the situation. "I'm really glad that Ryan is doing so well, but I need to talk about the situation with the boys." I tried to avoid accusations, but my words still sounded like a request for a change. The smile on Diana's face wavered slightly. She looked at me in disbelief, and I felt that this conversation would not be easy. "What's the big deal?" "It's just that it's become very common, and usually without much warning," she began, not understanding the depth of the situation. "I also work full-time, and I need a few evenings for myself. Maybe we could make a schedule or find another babysitter for a few nights." Diana became more tense with every word. Her face froze, and she seemed to sense that my words were not just a request, but rather a demand. She replied, holding back her anger. "You're just being selfish. You don't want to spend time with your own nephew." Her voice was accusatory. "You're jealous." She suddenly blurted out, pointing at me with her finger. "You're jealous that I found someone, and you're still alone. That's the thing." At that moment, I looked around, hoping that our parents would step in and at least point out to her the absurdity of her reaction. But instead of intervening, Mom nodded, agreeing with Diana, and told me, "Brittany, Your sister finally has a chance at happiness. Can't you put aside your own needs for once? Dad, as always, crossed his arms, supporting his mother's opinion. Family helps family, period, he said, as if it were the truth that needed no explanation. I felt a weight like a stone fall on my chest, and for a moment everything around me seemed to disappear. I was amazed, because I had helped my sister all my life, supported her by paying half of her rent, part of her bills, constantly looking after the children, and now, when I asked for some space for myself, they told me that I was selfish. I asked myself the question, why? Why can't I ask for balance in my life? Why should I always be on the side of others? I've been helping for years, I said, barely able to contain my anger and pain. I pay half of her rent, part of her bills, and I keep an eye on the boys all the time. I just need some kind of balance. I couldn't hold back these words. They burst out of me like thunder, filled with disappointment. Diana grinned, and her face twisted into a grimace. Try to raise 2 kids on your own, she said with a sneer. Oh, wait, you can't even find a mate. These words were the last straw. I got up from my chair, unable to stand it, and loudly scratching the floor with my nails, I left the table. Anger filled me with such force that I could no longer stay in this place, among people who did not seem to see my efforts, did not appreciate my sacrifice. I can't be your free babysitter anymore, I said, ignoring Diana's screams and my mother's calls to come back. For the first time in many years, I felt a weight begin to lift from my shoulders. I still couldn't get rid of the anger that was burning in my chest, but at that moment I felt better. 2 days later, Diana showed up at my door with the boys, wearing socks and with the clear intention of leaving them with me. She ignored my words and started saying, "I have a date with Ryan, it's important." Her voice was full of urgency, but I knew it shouldn't be on my shoulders. "No," I said, just blocking the passage and looking straight into his eyes. "I told you I wouldn't babysit anymore." My words sounded firm, and I felt my confidence begin to return at that moment. Diana's face was contorted with rage, and she did not hide her displeasure. "You can't be serious. The boys are already here, where should they go?" "It's up to you, you're their mother," I replied calmly, trying to stay calm. She tried to push me away, but I held on. "You're trying to ruin my relationship. Stop it," she screamed, almost sobbing with anger. "You want me to be alone forever, just like you." I didn't say anything, but as I closed the door in her face, I heard her banging, and screaming. I turned on the TV and just ignored her. The sounds of her anger became a fog in my head, and I finally felt that something in my life was starting to change. The phone call started that evening, first Diana, then Mom, then Dad. Everyone left me voice messages, and I listened to them without feeling any regret. There was a special message from my mother, which sounded like a sentence. "You're kicking yourself out of this family, Brittany. Prepare for the consequences, despite our quarrel." And at that moment, I realized that maybe this is the end of everything. I continued to send money for Diana's rent and bills. It seemed to me that this was the last thread connecting me with my family, and I was not ready to completely sever it. It was as if I was chained to old responsibilities, as if this gesture, though painful, was the only way to stay at least a little connected to what I once considered family. I was silent because I understood that if I stopped these transfers, if I broke up with them even this, then I would really be alone. Weeks passed, and the calls and messages gradually stopped. One day, lying in my bed after a long day at work, I realized that the phone was no longer ringing, that no one had called. It was the moment when I realized how long it had been since I had heard from them, and how strange it was to see the emptiness their silence had left. I focused on work because it was the only way to forget, but I also started doing yoga, which was a real revelation for me. Once I would not have believed that I would find solace in this, but it turned out that in silence and stretching you can find an almost invisible, but such an important harmony. Even for the first time in many years, I went on several dates. It was a strange, almost bold decision that filled me with some unexpected confidence, albeit with a note of anxiety, as if I were walking on a completely new but exciting road. I put myself first, and even though it was difficult, I felt like I was freeing myself. And after almost 3 months of silence, my phone lit up, a message from my mom. Tomorrow evening, a family dinner at Carmine's at 1900 hours. Diana has some news, please come. I hesitated, doubted, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe enough time had passed for everything to calm down. Maybe Diana was ready to apologize. I replied with a simple okay message, but I was still seething inside. There was nothing clear except that I had to be there. Maybe it was a moment for all of us when something had to change, and maybe I should have been a part of that change. I spent the next day feeling strangely anxious, wondering what was in store for me, but when I arrived at the restaurant, everyone was already sitting as if nothing had happened. Mom, Dad, Diana, Tyler, and Mason were running around the tables, and a tall man with dark hair, who I assumed was Ryan, stood up and held out his hand to me. His warm greeting was overly cordial, which immediately alarmed me. "You must be Brittany," he said with a smile that was a little too confident. "I've heard so much about you." I doubted he'd heard anything positive, but I controlled my wariness and smiled back. "Nice to meet you, Ryan." Dinner started off quite pleasantly. Ryan seemed to be normal, and even occasionally cast disapproving glances at the boys when they were naughty. Diana literally glowed, holding Ryan's hand on the table as if it were the greatest reward of her life that she had received. Maybe everything has really changed. Maybe this meeting was a chance for us to return to some old habits, where we could be a family again. We ordered food, and then Diana theatrically cleared her throat and reached for Ryan's hand. "I have something important that I want to share with everyone," she said, her voice ringing with excitement. I felt something constrict inside, like a harbinger of a storm. "Ryan and I are getting married." Those words came out of the blue. Mom and Dad immediately burst into applause. Dad clapped his hands, and Mom wiped her tears. Despite all the inner turmoil, I sincerely said, "Congratulations. I am truly happy for her." "When will this important day come?" I asked, trying not to show my inner unease. "4 months later," Ryan replied. "We found the perfect location by canceling the wedding." "That's great news." I also said that I was happy for both of them, but something changed in Diana's eyes, and her smile became hard, barely noticeable, but clear enough for me to understand that she was not going to stop there. "There's something else you should know, Brittany," she said, and the sound made my stomach clench. It was a phrase that I was afraid of, that I felt on the horizon. She froze, looking at me, and continued, "The wedding will be a small, family one." I felt my heart constrict and my breathing became heavy. But she froze, looking right at me, and "I decided not to invite you," she said, and there was not a drop of regret in her voice. There was a silence at the table that was louder than any word. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face, and everything I'd accumulated over the years flared up like fire inside. Have I done so much, and now I'm just being suspended? What have I finally done to deserve this? Did you hear me? An internal question shook my mind, but I remained silent. I couldn't figure out how it all became possible. Diana continued, "This wedding is for people who behave like a family. You've made it clear where you stand when you refuse to help with my children." I looked at my parents, expecting them to at least say something in my defense, but Mom looked down at her plate, and Dad shook his head. "Your sister's right, Brittany," he said. "You brought this on yourself." I couldn't believe my ears. 3 years of financial support, the countless hours I spent helping Diana, all my efforts, all my emotions, it all turned out to be nothing. Everything I've done has been worthless, because I've finally set a boundary. I didn't say another word. I just took my purse, put some money on the table for food and went out. No one called me that night. I've made a decision. I blocked all their numbers and deleted them from social media, but I couldn't stop the automatic transfer that I used to pay for Diana's rent. Life went on. I threw myself into my work. I made new friends in yoga classes and even started dating a guy named Michael who worked at a coffee shop near my office. It was like a completely new breath in my life. I finally started building a life that didn't revolve around my sister's needs, and sometimes, in moments of solitude, it was nice to feel like I was living for myself. Michael was simple, but there was something soothing about him, and I liked his concern for the little things. He never reminded me that I could have been different, as others often did. I began to enjoy every day, not thinking about what was happening in their family, where there had been no place for me for a long time. I still checked Diana's social media from time to time. She regularly posted updates on wedding preparations, dress fittings, cake tastings, and photos of the venue. The constant stream of these images seemed to remind me that I wasn't needed here, that I was someone else in this whole story. But she never contacted me, and neither did my parents. 4 months passed quickly, and although I tried to find the strength not to think about her, not to think about what would happen when the wedding actually took place, I still had to ask myself this question over and over again. After all, the wedding was scheduled for Saturday, and I had already planned in advance to spend a quiet weekend at home with takeaways and Netflix, without unnecessary worries and reminders that I was not important to them. Michael invited me to the concert, but I refused, no matter how hard I tried to pretend that I could be on a par with him. I knew that I would be thinking about the wedding all day, that I would probably somehow miss what I don't have. I was cooking dinner on Friday night when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and so, with a fair amount of perplexity, I looked through the peephole. Diana was standing in the hallway. I hesitated before opening the door, not knowing how I should feel at all. She looked like she hadn't cared about her appearance in a long time. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a careless ponytail instead of her usual perfect styling. She looked tense, as if she was ready for the storm that was about to break. "Diana, what are you doing here?" I asked, crossing my arms and not giving her a chance to enter right away. As if she hadn't noticed my question, she pushed past me into the apartment, her steps fast and restless. "We need to talk," she said, and I could hear some old pain in her voice, which she was trying to hide. "But the wedding is tomorrow," I said, trying to figure out what was going on. "Aren't you supposed to be at a rehearsal dinner or something?" I glanced at my watch, feeling the nervousness growing in my chest. "That's exactly what I want to talk about." Diana sat down on my couch without waiting for an invitation. Her movements were mechanical, as if she already knew in advance that it would be difficult for me to understand her. "I need you to look after the boys at the wedding tomorrow," she said, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw dropped slightly in surprise, and I stared at her as if trying to make sense of what she had just said. "What do you want?" I finally asked, not hiding my bewilderment. "Do you want me to babysit tomorrow, even though you specifically canceled your wedding invitation?" I felt the whole situation getting even more ridiculous. "They can't come to the ceremony, they'll ruin everything," she continued, pausing and nervously running her fingers through her hair again. "Tyler's going through a period where he's constantly interrupting, and Mason smashed a vase at the venue during our last visit, so hire a babysitter. I tried 2 different ones, but canceled because of me. Besides your family, you have to help." I couldn't believe what she was saying. It was as if nothing had happened, she was just deciding for me what I should do, as if the weight was still on my shoulders. I laughed in disbelief, feeling my anger begin to gain strength. "Diana," I said, "you told me yourself that I'm not family enough to attend your wedding. You can't have both at the same time. You're blowing it all up to an incredible size." She made a stiff gesture with her hand, as if trying to dismiss everything I said, and sighed dismissively. "I was upset," she confessed, her face becoming more serious. "But it's important. If you don't help me, I'll have to bring them to the wedding, and I'll make a scene that looks like a parenting problem, not a Brittany problem." She paused, and then continued with a new, cold determination in her voice. Well, if you won't do it for me, do it because that's what Mom and Dad want. They will be very disappointed if you refuse. I froze, realizing that her words didn't just hurt, they opened some deep wound in my soul that I hadn't thought about for a long time. Mom and Dad hadn't spoken to me in 4 months. They hadn't even called me for my birthday. And now I heard that Diana would use their opinion as a weapon. Mom and Dad haven't spoken to me in 4 months. They haven't even called me for my birthday, I repeated, as if these words were supposed to comfort me a little. Diana grinned. Her self-confidence was obvious, and she was clearly enjoying this moment. You know they'll take my side again if I tell them how selfish you are, she said, and I felt my insides freeze. I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, but this time I didn't show it. Instead of reacting as usual, with open rage or sarcasm, I forced myself to adopt a neutral expression, carefully hiding what I would like to say. Taking a deep breath, I asked, seemingly calmly, but with a feeling of intense irritation, what time should I expect them? Diana was silent for a couple of seconds, and then her face lit up with a victorious smile, as if I had just surrendered to her request. The ceremony starts at 11 o'clock, she replied, not hiding her satisfaction, so I'll take them around 9:30. We have to finish everything by 8 o'clock. She added a few more words, something about being late, but I was no longer listening. Her voice seemed to be moving away, becoming empty and devoid of significance. I probably didn't know exactly what I wanted to say, and I just said politely, but with obvious irritation, of course. She got up from the sofa. Her face suddenly became lighter, as if she had got rid of the weight that had been hanging on her since the very beginning of our conversation. Suddenly, her voice became soft, in a tone that seemed real and sincere to her, and Diana said with a grin, I knew you would come, little sister. It means a lot to me. She left, and I was left alone, listening to the silence that filled the room after she left. I didn't waste any time, although I admit I didn't have the energy for much thought. I mentally switched to something else. First, I called my boss, Mark, and after briefly explaining the situation, I asked for an urgent vacation. I had almost 3 weeks, which I had saved up since last year, and Mark, without asking unnecessary questions, easily agreed. This whole vacation thing seemed to me like a kind of release from all the obligations that I once considered my own. After the call, I hung up, and then, as if I didn't fully realize what was happening, I immediately opened my laptop. I spent an hour online booking a 10-day stay at a beach resort in Hawaii. Departure is the next morning at 6 o'clock. I've always dreamed of going there, but I've never been able to afford it. Partly because all the time was spent on Diana, on her problems, on her needs, on her insane demands. The irony didn't escape me, and no matter how hard I tried, the feeling of bitterness and self-abandonment still wouldn't leave me. I packed my things quickly, without hesitation, setting the alarm for 3 a.m. in time to catch a taxi to the airport. She zipped up her suitcase with one sharp movement, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Of course, there was guilt, but it was with me anyway. Everything I ever did was against the background of what I was constantly being told. You have to put Diana's needs first. It's been embedded in me since childhood, and it seemed like I couldn't help it. But underneath that guilt, there was another emotion, excitement, indescribable freedom, and pride that I could finally have my way. I could leave it all behind. Leave her, leave them, and leave. How long have I been waiting for this? I couldn't remember. I tried not to think about the consequences and packed my things in a suitcase, feeling my soul lighten. I slept fitfully that night, half of me still expecting Diana to somehow sense my plan and show up to stop me. But the alarm went off without incident, and when I found myself on a plane heading west in the morning, I felt better, as if I had finally gotten rid of something heavy. I switched my phone to flight mode, and the flight attendant smiled and handed me a mimosa cocktail when we reached cruising altitude. I sipped, looking out the window at the clouds below, and felt some kind of overwhelming feeling. Yes, my independence. Hawaii is everything I dreamed of, that paradise where nothing connects me with what I left behind. The resort was located on a pristine beach with turquoise water and soft white sand. I enjoyed this first day, alternating swimming with napping in a hammock and drinking colorful cocktails brought by attentive staff, for the first time in many years without thinking about other people. I felt completely relaxed and detached from everything that had once been my burden in life. I kept my phone turned off all day, knowing full well what was waiting for me when I turned it on. Diana would show up at my apartment around 9:30 a.m. with Tyler and Mason, probably already dressed in their little suits. She would knock, then knock again, and then the calls would follow one after the other, starting at 10 o'clock. By 10:30, she would be furious because the children, of course, could not wait. And I knew that the next morning, she would probably put all her emotions on me. My role in her life was predictable. So, sitting in my room in Hawaii, I ordered breakfast in my room and was sipping coffee on the balcony overlooking the ocean when I turned on my phone. He immediately exploded with notifications: 12 missed calls from Diana, 8 from Mom, 5 from Dad, and dozens of text messages. Each message was more desperate and angry. At 9:45 a.m., Diana wrote, "Where are you? We've been knocking for 15 minutes. At 10:03 a.m., "This isn't funny, Brittany." At 10:37 a.m., "I can't believe you're doing this to me on my wedding day." Mom wrote at 11:22 a.m., "Your sister is in tears. Do you really want this?" At 12:15 p.m., Diana wrote, "You completely ruined my wedding. The boys are out of control, and Ryan's family thinks I'm a terrible mother." Dad texted at 2:30 p.m., "This is more than disappointing, Brittany. You've gone too far this time." The last message from Diana came at 20:46, "You have crossed all boundaries. Don't try to contact any of us again. You are no longer part of this family." I should have felt empty, but instead I felt strangely liberated. Everything that connected me with them, with this family, with this life, which seemed to be the only possible one, suddenly disappeared as soon as Diana sent me her last message. They turned me off, not the other way around, and now the decision was out of my hands. At some point, I realized that I no longer had to obey their demands, their expectations, and this feeling was unbearably sweet. I opened my banking application, and without delay canceled the recurring transfer of rent that I had sent to Diana. Ryan could help her, because after all, they live together, and I shouldn't be supporting her like I have to. I closed the app and turned off my phone again. The beautiful silence filled the space around me again, and I got up, deciding to go swimming in the ocean. An hour later, leaving the warm sandy coastline, I felt the water washing over my body, taking away all the remnants of anxiety and fear that I had accumulated over the years. When I was lying on the beach enjoying the warm sun, my cousin Rachel called me. I almost ignored the call, but then I stopped. Rachel has always been kind to me. She didn't get involved in family drama. She always found time for me, despite the fact that she has been living abroad for the last few years. She wasn't a part of this whirlwind that took us away. I picked up the phone, and her voice, still not fully awake, but still warm, crept into my consciousness. "Brittany, are you okay? I heard there was drama at the wedding." Rachel said it with a slight accent, as always, and I felt a sense of relief at her words. She didn't have the reproach that I expected from everyone else. She had no complaints. I sighed, running my hand over my face, feeling like everything related to Diana and her problems was invading my space again. "I've received some angry messages," Rachel continued. "It looks like the boys were a handful, and that's putting it mildly." She spoke as if her eyes and voice were filled with kind curiosity rather than judgment. "Diana had to bring them in because you weren't around to look after them during the ceremony. Your parents tried to do it, but they couldn't do it. Tyler knocked over a flower arrangement while bowing, and Mason kept asking loudly when it would be okay to eat the cake. I tried not to smile, but it didn't work." Rachel was laughing into the phone, and I could hear her relief, as if she felt light again. She continued, and I could see everything she was talking about, almost like in a movie. During the reception, they ran around the table, screaming, and the worst was when they decided to play with the cake before it was cut. They stuck their hands in it and started fighting with food. Ryan's mother looked like she was going to faint. "Oh my God!" I gasped, half in horror, half in emotion, and felt an awkward smile rise on my lips, even though I didn't want it to. Ryan's aunt. "She's quite decent," she said something like, "Maybe you were too hasty with this marriage." You could have heard the pin drop when she said that. I couldn't help but laugh. Everything that was happening seemed both wild and absurd to me, and at some point I thought that maybe I could no longer interfere in these scenes that I disliked so much. Rachel continued in the same tone as always, not demanding anything from me, but expressing concern at the same time. "Diana blames you for everything, of course," she said, and I just nodded, even though I couldn't see her. Of course, she blames." I said it with such indifference, as if my words were just an empty echo. It can't be that her children need discipline or that she should have hired a proper babysitter a few weeks ago instead of assuming that I would do it anyway. Rachel was silent, and then added softly, "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, and to be honest, I think you did the right thing. They've all been using you for years." I agreed with her, but the weight of the memories wouldn't leave me. I put aside thoughts of my family and how I once loved and took it all for granted. I'm completely immersed in my vacation. At that moment, I couldn't afford to bring up those memories again. My vacation was a time when I allowed myself to forget everything. I was snorkeling, enjoying the company of sea turtles, took a helicopter tour over volcanic landscapes, learned to hula dance, and enjoyed fresh pineapples every day, which were brought to me by friendly staff. This vacation was my time to recover. Everything was new, bright, and completely alien to the world I had left. When I returned home, I was tanned, rested, and more at peace than I had ever been in the last few years. There were no new messages from my family, and I wasn't expecting them anymore. Although it was predictable, the finality of the silence was still a bit jarring. 3 weeks have passed, and I'm completely immersed in my work. It was my salvation, and my boss Mark noticed the difference in my energy and focus. On Friday afternoon, he called me into his office. "Brittany, I've been impressed with your work lately," he said with a smile. "The Tosan account is our most profitable this quarter, and your marketing strategy for Wilson was brilliant. I would like to offer you a promotion to senior marketing strategist." I was stunned. "Thank you, Mark," I said, feeling everything around me disappear, and only this moment remains. I do not know what to say. "Say yes." Mark's smile widened. "It comes with a 15% raise and its own office. You deserve it." With my new salary, I was finally able to afford a nicer apartment, which I had long imagined in my dreams. I found a cozy studio apartment in a new building with a gemstone on the facade and a small roof garden, which promised to be my personal oasis amidst the noise of the city. The move was bittersweet. I was excited about my new place, because it reflected all my efforts and dreams that had become reality. But despite that, I couldn't help but think that my family wasn't there to share this moment with me, as I once thought they would be. Could I ever have imagined that I would find myself in such a place, but without those with whom I would like to share this happiness? There was no response. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, when I was unpacking the last boxes in the kitchen, the phone rang again. It was Rachel. I picked up the phone, almost expecting her to ring, as if I knew that this moment would bring me back to thinking about the family that no longer existed. "Hello, cousin," I heard her say. "How are you?" "It's okay," I replied, but there was something hazy and elusive in my soul, like an underwater flowing river. "But I have family gossip. I think you'll be interested to know what's going on with Diana." "She's fine, despite everything," Rachel continued, and I could hear a hint of compassion in her voice, but also a slight concern. "I still care about her physical condition, but emotionally, not that much. She and Ryan fight all the time, mostly over the boys." He wasn't prepared for how difficult they were, and Diana was doing nothing to correct their behavior. She just drops them off at your parents' place almost every weekend so she and Ryan can spend time and work on their marriage. I shook my head, realizing that none of this solved the real problem. It doesn't solve the real problem, I said out loud, and that warm ache flared up inside me again, realizing how much I had invested in this family, but had never received anything in return. Boys continue to keep their boundaries, as if they are being passed from one adult to another, like parcels. Your mom is exhausted, and your dad is just working his ass off trying to stop Mason from climbing on the bookshelf. It happened again last week. The whole situation is a mess. Part of me felt vindicated. I knew I had made the right decision. But at the same time, I truly felt sorry for Tyler and Mason. They are not to blame for what happened. They behaved this way because the adults in their lives didn't give them the very structure they needed. I hoped that eventually they would be able to figure it out, but deep down I knew that this might not happen. I hope they figure it out, I said, and there was less comfort in my words than the inevitable acceptance that all events, both good and bad, pass by, leaving traces that cannot be erased. Rachel thought about it, and then asked cautiously, "Brittany, have you ever thought about reconciling with them? Reconnect?" I thought about it. The question was not simple. I didn't know what to say. Of course, I missed the family we once were. It was the kind of family where we laughed, talked, supported each other, shared joy and sorrow. But it all seemed so far away. Maybe someday they'll realize how they offended me, maybe someday they'll reach out with sincere remorse. But I wasn't sure if they were capable of that. I had been trying to please everyone for so long that now it was hard for me to believe in their sincerity. I did not know that they would have to admit how they treated me, I said, feeling these words come out of my mouth, with the sickness that still lives in my soul. And I'm not sure they're capable of that. Rachel listened to me and replied quietly, "I understand, Brittany. I think you did the right thing. Sometimes you need to put yourself first." After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and, sitting on my new balcony, watched the lights of the city, which, like millions of small stars, burned in the dark, reminding me how big and multifaceted this world is. I thought about my sister, my parents, and my nephews, whom I probably won't see again when they grow up. There was sadness in it, but no regrets. I spent years being the family doormat, giving everything and getting nothing in return. I was their invisible support, their background, but I was never in the foreground of their lives. And now, finally, I was free. The release was necessary for my own well-being. Maybe someday they'll realize what they've lost. Maybe one day they'll reach out with sincere remorse, but I couldn't wait any longer, couldn't adjust to their expectations again. While they were living their lives, I continued to build mine on my own terms. I had a job that I loved, a new home that I had set up to my liking, friends who respected and accepted me for who I was, and most importantly, I became stronger and more confident than ever. I raised my cup in a silent toast to the future, whatever it might bring, and was ready to face it, on my own terms.